If you had kids or have them now, you have heard this phrase, oh, I don't know, a million times. Do I have to? Well, there are a lot of us in our life with Christ that we tend to ask that question. Do I have to? When we think about the commands, and I suppose a lot of this has to do with just your how you were raised and when you were raised, even. Like for me, I graduated from high school in 1971, which means my junior high and high school years were in the 60s, which was a time of turbulence and rebellion. One of the big things was nobody should tell me what to do. I don't, and especially not an older person. So we kind of had, I have had in my lifetime a little bit of a battle dealing with people telling me what to do, which, oh, by the way, a whole lot of life and adulting comes down to figuring out what do you do about people telling you what to do. And at times, in this adulting thing, there's the whole thing of, well, I have to tell people what to do, and sometimes that's kind of fun, and at other times, no, it's not very fun. Well, okay, what do you do about people telling you what to do? John, in the passage we're looking at now in 1 John chapter 5, he talks about, well, you can see the connection when I read this. This is verse 3. In fact, this is love for God. Here is the identifier about what is love for God. Okay, here it is. To keep his commands. And really, that's about doing what you're told to do. Somebody has to tell me what to do, and I have to decide, am I going to do what they're telling me to do? And that somebody, turns out, is God. In fact, what obedience actually is a demonstration of love. And so let's take a quick look at this. Quick, like I can do anything quick. Well, here's the deal. There's a couple of reasons why people will obey. One is they fear punishment, and the fear of punishment is greater than the inconvenience of obedience, right? Or even the pain of obedience. That, honestly, if as you read through the Old Testament, by the way, you are reading through the Old Testament, aren't you? A lot of Christians don't, but it matters. There's tons of stuff in there that matter to your walk with Christ. So, okay, there's a lot of things in the law that are done can be done, and actually by the time Jesus came on the scene, and quite much earlier than when Jesus came to earth, were done purely out of fear of punishment. See, when the laws of the Old Testament were violated, there was always a punishment. There was always a price that had to be paid. Sometimes it was reasonable and logical, and sometimes, honestly, it didn't seem so logical. It seems pretty strong. And for people raised in a democratic republic like us Americans, it seems really unfair and unjust that there would be these kinds of extreme punishments for violating what to us today seem like insignificant laws. Well, let me just give you one for an example. One of the laws was that the seventh day of the week, Saturday, would be a Sabbath. And on a Sabbath, no normal work could be done. So you had to, on Friday, and really the week leading up to Saturday, you made preparations so that you didn't have to do work on Saturday. It was a day of rest. A friend of mine gives, I think, the best definition of what the Sabbath is for him, he says it's 24 hours where I produce nothing. Well, for the Israelite, it was 24 hours where no normal work was done. Now, in an emergency, there were provisions for emergencies. But if normal work was done, listen to this, on Saturday, the person who was observed or caught doing work on Saturday was to be stoned to death. What? Okay, there were, honestly, I would love to be able to justify that and say, well, it makes sense. Well, I'm not sure I can make it make sense in any way other than to say God was really, really serious about establishing and maintaining a rhythm of healthy life for his people. Now, that's just one example. So for centuries, God's people, obeyed out of fear of punishment. But there is another motive for obedience, and that is a motive of love and a kind of a piece of that love, a component of that love is honor, respect. So you have fear, and that didn't go away. The New Testament doesn't eliminate the fear of God. What John essentially eliminates, remember when we were back there and he said, perfect love casts out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. And he went back before that and said, we have this a clear conscience before God because of our love for one another and for him. So it all comes back to love. I'm going to leave the fear of God thing alone, and someday maybe we'll come back to a more in-depth study, but maybe not. I don't know. Okay, so you got fear as a motivation and love as a motivation for obeying. When in its best form, obeying God's command, whatever the command is, comes down to a motivation of love. And he says, this is love for God, to keep his commands. Okay. Boy, that just goes against the grain, doesn't it? Well, okay. And he goes on, and this almost doesn't sound right. And his commands are not burdensome. Really? So it's not inconvenient? No, he didn't say that. What's a burden? What is a burden? Everybody has their own measure of what is or what is not a burden, and that's just life. I get that. I think a lot of times we mistake inconvenience for burdensome. And we live in a culture, we live in a world, in a time of world history where so much technology is devoted to our convenience, eliminating inconvenience. So we don't have, you think about this. You don't even have to go back, just go back 200 years, back in the early days of the founding of the United States. You didn't just hop from New York City to Philadelphia. You had to get in a carriage, or you had to get on a horse, or you had to walk. There weren't even trains. This would take hours. Hours, not right now you can hop in a car, get on a turnpike, you can take the train. Not going to take you hours. Well, almost all of life in 1770s in America was inconvenient. We all just wherever you are, look around and notice the things that are there and are the way they are. But it's not evil, it's not wrong. But the truth is, we got a lot of things that are for our convenience. So it's easy for us to mistake inconvenient for burdensome. God's commands may be inconvenient. They are often countercultural. And there's another word that I hear and read they are often counterintuitive. In other words, that's not what I would have figured on. But that's not burdensome. Here, last thing on burdensome. What makes anything a burden? Well, it has to do with my attitude toward it. Really, right? The similar activities or even identical activities done for different motivations or with different attitudes can either be a burden or a joy. And that's weird, but it's true. Okay. John says, these commands are not burdensome. Look at this. He goes on and he says, I lost my place. Oh, really lost my place because I was back in chapter 4. I don't even know how that happened. Okay. His commands are not burdensome. For everyone born of God overcomes the world. See, part of overcoming the world is a frame of mind, an attitude, a mindset. And he goes on to say, this is the victory that has overcome the world, even our faith. When I was a kid, we used to sing an old gospel song called Faith is the Victory. Well, that's where it came from. So what does overcome the world? See, if the world says obedience is always a burden, and if it needs to be cast as inconvenient, then that's fine. But that's what the world says. How do you overcome that worldview? Is it by effort? No. John doesn't say, here's the victory that has overcome the world, even our effort. No. It's our faith. There's a lot to be said about what does that mean and what does that look like. Because if we don't figure this faith thing out and engage it well, we'll spend our entire life saying, well, that's just not fair. Or do I have to? We're going to come back to it. Duh. No kidding. Imagine that. Next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.